At the beginning of this parasha, we read about the institution that's known in Hebrew as Shemitah. Shemitah is the sabbatical year, every seventh year, and there are two major features of Shemitah, and one is the remission of debts, and the other is the commandment to let the land lie fallow. And how the sages dealt with the remission of debts is really a very interesting thing. But I'm not going to talk about it this year. Because I'm going to talk about the sabbatical for the land. Okay, so according to the Torah, and this isn't even like interpretation, this is explicit in the parasha, we're not allowed to sow seeds, we're not allowed to reap, we're not allowed to harvest, not allowed to tend the trees, and anything that grows on its own, right? Like if you've got fruit trees or olive trees and you don't tend them, stuff is still going to grow, right? Maybe not to the same quantity, maybe not to the same quality, but it's still going to grow. Anybody can harvest and eat that, but anybody, right? Not just the owner, okay? So poor people, whatever, can come into your orchard and pick the fruit that grows on its own. Okay, and the Torah knows that people are going to say, well, what am I supposed to eat? Right? What am I supposed to eat? And again, it explicitly says in the parasha, if you uphold this law, then the yield of produce in the 6th year is going to be so great that it'll feed you through the entire 7th year and also the beginning of the 8th year, right? Because you need food in the beginning of the 8th year too, right? Because if you can't do agricultural tasks until Rosh Hashanah of year 8 or year 1 of the new cycle, you're not going to have food right away, right? But you're going to have so much produce, you're not going to have to worry about it. Now, frankly, for most of Jewish history, these laws have been theoretical, right? I mean, most Jews are not farmers, right? Anybody here a farmer? You weren't, okay, you personally. Okay, your family, okay, I'm not saying, right, no Jews were, right, but most Jews were not, and if I'd been giving this sermon in Norwich, there would be more. There were, you know, at least when I left that congregation, there were still some families that were active farmers and others that had been farmers. Okay, but mostly we haven't been farmers. And anyway, these laws only apply in Eretz Israel. They only apply in the land of Israel. Anybody here a farmer in Israel? No? Anybody the son or daughter of a farmer in Israel? Again, no, right? I mean, yeah, so these are theoretical laws until what? Zionism, right? Not 1948, actually about almost 100 years before that, right? When Jews started coming back to Eretz Israel and farming, and even what's known as the old Yishuv, the Jews who had lived there all along, right? Some of them left Jerusalem, the old city, which is the old city was Jerusalem, and it was getting crowded and unhealthy, and some of them left. And if you've ever been to or even heard of a place called Petach Tikva, right, that was the first Moshava, right, the first place that was town founded by Jews who were farmers, and that meant that these laws mattered again. Right now, frankly, most of the pioneers, the people who founded the kibbutzim and the moshavim, and even, small individual farms, they were secular. But some were religious, and beyond that, and this is interesting, right? I mean, we have a lot of agricultural laws, right? And for example, you may know that grafting is forbidden by the Torah. However, produce of a tree that was grafted is still kosher, right? The sin is on the person who does the grafting, but it's still kosher. And similarly, neutering a bull or a sheep is forbidden by the Torah. Right? But if you had a bull or a sheep that was neutered and then it was slaughtered for food, still kosher, right? But food that was grown during the sabbatical year, nobody's allowed to eat it, right? Or no Jew, at least. I mean, theoretically nobody, but really, right? So the question was, first of all, if I'm a Jewish farmer, right, and we're trying to reestablish Jewish agriculture in the land of Israel, right, and now you're telling me 1 out of every 7 years I can't farm, how am I going to establish a viable agricultural sector, right? And you may think that, but let me tell you, this is one of the reasons why so many kosher restaurants fail. Right? Because they got to be closed 1 day out of every 7. And the landlord doesn't say, oh, okay, you got to be closed 1 day out of every 7, so I'm only going to charge you 6/7 of the rent. Right? So it's hard. Aside from the fact that a lot of kosher restaurants feel that because they have a semi-captive market, they can get away with bad food and bad service, right? But even restaurants that have good food and good service, still, it's an economic challenge, right? So, first question is, if we have to observe these laws, how are Jewish farmers to farm? But beyond that, right, if everybody is forbidden to eat this produce, how are we supposed to eat during the 7th year? Right now, so you might say, well, what did they do? What did the Jews who lived in Eretz Yisrael do before they were Jewish farmers? Right? And what did they do? They ate food that was raised by Arabs, right? So not a problem, because only Jewish farmers have to obey these rules. And the fact of the matter is that in the sabbatical year in particular, the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox community, still prefers to eat Arab produce, okay? Become a little bit more challenging since, it's dangerous for Jews to go into the West Bank, and it's illegal for West Bank Palestinians to come into Israel, but, people still do it. But the other thing is that the borders of Eretz Yisrael, right, which is a halachic concept, that's not the same as the borders of the state of Israel, right? So one of the descriptions of the land of Israel in the Torah is from Dan to Beersheba, right? Dan is up, it's not by the Lebanese border, it's literally on the Lebanese border, and Beersheba, I don't know, it's about an hour or so south of Jerusalem, a little bit more south of Tel Aviv, right? So anything south of Beersheba is not considered part of Eretz Yisrael in terms of the Shmita or any of the other agricultural laws that only apply in Eretz Yisrael. And a good chunk of the coast is also not considered Eretz Yisrael. And this is the great irony, right? Why would the coast not be considered Eretz Yisrael? Yeah. It was the land of the Philistines, right? During the biblical period, right? The Jews lived in the mountains, and the coast was Philistines, right? Now, where do the vast majority of Israeli Jews live? The coast, right? Who lives in the mountains? The Arabs, right? Exactly the reverse situation, right? So a good chunk of the coast is not considered Eretz Yisrael, so you could eat the produce from there. And I can tell you, I lived on a kibbutz 1986 to 1988, and it was, talk about Beersheba. When we said we're going north, we meant we're going to Beersheba. Okay, our kibbutz was down near Eilat. And we had the southernmost vineyard for growing table grapes in the country. And one of the years that I lived there was a sabbatical year, and Haredim were coming all the time to buy our grapes. And somebody said to me once, it must be because they don't consider us Jewish. And I said, no, that's not the issue. And I explained to them that the borders of Eretz Yisrael are not the same thing as the borders of Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel, and that we're not part of Eretz Yisrael for the purposes of these laws. So they wanted to buy our grapes. Okay, now, but, all right, so that's great if you can. There's not a lot of agriculture south of Beersheba. Right there, there's more along the coast, but it's not the whole coast. That's not Eretz Yisrael. So what do you do if your lands are definitely, halakhically Eretz Yisrael? And even if you don't care about violating the Shmita, people aren't going to buy your produce, right? Because they care about it, and you won't be able to sell it because all the produce has to be marked kosher and it's under the chief rabbinate and blah, 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 blah. So what do? And really, I'm asking a question, all right? Think of what might be potential solutions to that problem. Yeah, Jake.
Everything is farmed on raised beds or something?
Farmed on raised beds, right? And that is some of it, okay? Particularly hydroponics, right? Where it's not raised in the soil of Israel, right? It's hydroponics, right? You all know what hydroponics, right? So that's one solution. The other was, it was come up by Rabbi Isaac Elkanan Spector in the late 1800s, I believe, called the Heter Mechira. Okay, they sold the whole land to a non-Jew, right? And similar to what we do with Hametz on Pesach, right? So if you sell the whole country to a non-Jew, then, right, because it's the land of Israel that belongs to a Jew. Okay, so he came up with that. I've always wondered what would happen if at the end of the year, the non-Jew, I'm not selling it back, all the Jews have to leave, right? But so far that hasn't happened. Because actually, they're careful not to use a Palestinian Muslim, they usually use a Druze person and they're pro-Israel. Okay, but the Haredim by and large don't accept this, right? And I'll tell you, I mean, I don't know, I think I've seen some of you, who here besides me belongs to the Facebook group Kosher Costco, right? Okay. Every once in a while, you'll see somebody write, be aware that they're selling tangerines in Costco and they're from Israel and they're Shemitah produce, right? So, I mean, you would think, frankly, that we would want to encourage people to buy produce from Israel, but many people in Kosher Costco actually discourage people from buying produce from Israel because either, you know, it's Shemitah produce or the tithes haven't been taken or whatever. Okay, but that Facebook group is a more like Haredi Facebook group. For the most part, there aren't too many conservative Jews in there, although there are some of us, right? But there's a book that came out in the early 1900s by Rabbi Eliezer Berkowitz. And it was called Not in Heaven, the Nature and Function of Halacha. And he was talking about some of these problems vis-a-vis Israel. And he said that the halacha that developed in Galut, in exile, is not suited to an independent Jewish state. Or you can't really have a state that depends on selling the whole country to a non-Jew once every 7 years, right? You can't really have, and everybody knows, like, could you imagine if we had to shut down power generation every Shabbos? Right? Impossible to have modern life, right? So, all right, so we know that there are non-Jews who work in the electric plants or non-religious Jews. So we don't have to worry about like finding a halachically valid way to generate electricity on Shabbat. And, you know, he said he's absolutely right that the people who take halacha seriously mostly don't take the existence of the state of Israel seriously. and the people who take the existence of the state of Israel seriously mostly don't take halacha seriously. You may have heard me do this. I would extend Berkowitz's article further to our situation in the United States, right? Because we're not just subjects, we're citizens, right? I mean, 4 out of the 50 governors in the United States are Jews named Josh. Okay, 4, right, there are 4 Jewish Joshes who are governors. Likely, possibly to be a 5th in New Jersey, Josh Gottheimer, right? And 2 other Jewish governors who are not named Josh, but they both have the initials JB. Okay, JB Pritzker in Illinois and Jared B. Paulus in Colorado. Okay, so we're not powerless, right? At least on the local level, on the state. Well, in the White House, right? God help us, right? So, we're not powerless, and therefore, laws that say, well, we just have no choice but to do what the government says, right? Don't exist. Like when it's not so because we have input. So, again, the Jews who take Holocaust seriously mostly don't take citizenship seriously. And the Jews who take citizenship seriously mostly don't take Holocaust seriously. And what we need, I think, both here and in Israel is a type of legal thinking that takes both citizenship and halacha seriously. Shabbat shalom. Right, yeah.
2 quick questions.
Yeah.
Number 1, could the solution have been to kind of rotate which farmer or which area did Shemitah? So
No, it is a fixed year.
and the other thing is, some of the offerings were like barley or wheat, like the omer, which is a sheaf of barley.
Right.
You can't grow, or you can't cut that, you can't harvest that, how do you then perform?
You could harvest it if it grew on its own.
Okay.
You couldn't like plant or weed, you couldn't do any agricultural tasks. But, I would imagine, it's an excellent question. I would imagine the assumption is that there would be enough that grew on its own that you could at least do that, or you save it from year 6. Right. Okay. Yeah.
I have to learn people use the funds only, and I wasn't kidding when I said I was on the end of the phone.
Oh, I know.
Sin that is accused of those things in legislature, way that he said. And yet, the natural clear of things, farmers who are successful farmers rotate the crops and leave their fields abandoned.
Right.
Schedule.
Right.
And I don't know that the doctor comes to visit the teaching. I'm just telling you that it has dead from value of operation, how I'm explaining that.
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, that definitely helps. I would, and then we'll go on. There is a shul in Fredericksburg. I don't know like how large, and there's also a substantial Jewish student population at Mary Washington, and therefore I would assume that, there's Jewish faculty there too, but yeah, it's clearly not like, right, okay, anyway. Let's, continue with the Hatzi Kaddish, 155 or 428. And then the Musaf service beginning on the next page, we'll say Musaf together through the Kedusha and then, continue individually, please, right?